Good morning to all of you from sunny or maybe not so sunny Bremen today in northern Germany. My name is Rebecca Karbaumer. I am a Sustainable Mobility Project Coordinator for the Ministry of Transport in the city-state of Bremen. It's really wonderful to be here today, also to be the first speaker in your Congress. It's an absolute honor. So thanks very much for the invitation to ITS, Caribbean and South America, and Luigi for organizing and for inviting me to join you today. So I'm going to take you on a journey to northern Germany, in northern Europe, to the city-state of Bremen. In case you're not familiar with it, here it is on the map for you. Bremen city-state is the smallest state in the country of Germany, and that has some ups and downs. Ups, definitely short decision-making processes and patterns. The downside is we are always in financial distress. We are the poorest city-state in Bremen. That also means we have to work on not only smart but efficient solutions. So we like to talk about wise transport planning in Bremen. If you've never been here, I cordially invite you now to join us in the city of Bremen. Bremen is known for the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site, beautiful city center. Maybe you've heard of the Bremen Town Musicians, the children's fairy tale. But Bremen is also known as a compact city on the water. During the Second World War, 85% of the city was destroyed during bombings in 1944. But luckily, during the rebuilding process, the historic streetscape was kept in place. That means it is still a very compact human-scale city, which grew organically over many, many centuries. And that's reflected in our modal split on transport on a daily, for daily mobility needs, with a fairly low share of car use. Only 36% of daily trips are done by car. More than 60% are done using sustainable travel modes like walking, cycling, and public transport. The city-state of Bremen has 570,000 residents, approximately. So even though it's, I would say, internationally fairly not such a well-known city as other German cities like Bremen or Berlin or Hamburg, Bremen is quite a large city that houses lots of residents. But we also face a number of transport challenges that are very, very similar, I think, in a global context, very the same. And one is, as I already mentioned, dealing with the historic streetscape. Bremen is a city that was built for people, over centuries. And this is an example or picture of a street from the 1890s. You can see that roads were meant for access and housing areas. But essentially, there are no vehicles, or they're not intended for the storage of vehicles. They're there for people to walk and for deliveries, places for children to play. And unfortunately, over the last decades, that has changed significantly and become a huge problem because we have too many cars in the city, and especially too many parked cars in the city. And that has become a problem not only because space is not used efficiently or equitably, but it's also become a safety risk for residents, such as in this picture here, the fire brigade, which cannot navigate these narrow streets with too many cars. We also obviously all face the challenge and the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, NOx emissions, noise emissions in the city, because it's not only detrimental to the environment, but also to human health, places which the cities were built for. And then we also have that challenge of how to deal with that public space in order to create socially equitable and accessible and socially inclusive neighborhoods for people of all ages, of all abilities, and all genders, and to provide quality of life and green spaces rather than parking spaces. I think many of us, especially during COVID, have realized the value of public green spaces as safe places to meet outdoors in a time where we have to socially distance otherwise. So the value of public green space and that question, how we use our street space, has also started to change in the dialogue. Also in the context of urban heat island effect, changing global temperatures, and the need for the possibility for green spaces in cities to lower temperature. And climate adaptation, not only reducing emissions is important, but adapting to a changing global climate. Events in recent weeks, months, and years have shown that we all have to adapt to even more and more extreme weather and climate changes. And for Bremen, 90% of the city is protected by dams. So flooding and heavy rain events is a very significant issue for us. And transport plays a role in all of that. And as I mentioned in the title of my presentation, sustainable transport plays a role in addressing those issues. But what does sustainable transport need? First of all, it's the urban structure and local economy that is required for a sustainable transport system. So we need a local economy that is easily accessible on foot and without a car, essentially, on foot and by bicycle. We need facilities in neighborhoods that are accessible on foot and by bicycle, like schools and daycare centers and doctors. This is the backbone and the foundation for sustainable transport systems. That other backbone is high quality public transport, the most efficient way of getting people from A to B. And we have a fairly good public transport network in Bremen: buses, buses, trams, regional railway systems, and separated systems for public transport, so that we don't have our buses stuck in queues, in traffic jams, and that it becomes faster and more efficient and more attractive than traveling with an automobile. We also in Bremen focus a lot on providing high quality cycling infrastructure. If you build it, they will come, as say in the well-known film about American baseball. But we have a very good network of cycling infrastructure as well, and are continually expanding that, so that also, again, people of all ages and abilities can cycle in the city. And then for those few times when one does need a car, which is, to be realistic, sometimes you just need a car, or sometimes you want to use a car. As a supplement to walking, cycling, and public transport, car sharing is an important alternative to car ownership. And even though car sharing is nothing new, I just wanted to go on a tangent and to briefly explain how it works. There are a number of different car sharing systems, different types of car sharing, but the most commercial car sharing providers work the same way. You book a car either on a website, by phone, or on a smartphone app. And this is one aspect where I'm definitely a proponent of digitization, is the smartphone has made it so much easier for shared mobility services like car sharing to become easy and convenient to use. So once you've booked a vehicle, you go to the station or vehicle near you, access it with a card or your smartphone or your key from a safe, and off you go. Use it just like you would use your private car. When you're done, you drop it off. You only pay for the time you use, rather than paying for 100% of the time as a private car owner. And the vehicle is able, or providers are able to make use of this idle capacity. The average private car sits around 23 hours a day. And car sharing vehicles are used much more efficiently over time. And that has not only, or car sharing is not only convenient and flexible, but it also has a number of environmental impacts. Car sharing users walk, cycle, and use public transport much more than the average car owner. So simply by having different mobility behavior, they are already reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Car sharing use also leads to a downsizing of vehicles, or choosing of the appropriate vehicle for your journey. Like, for example, if you are just 1 or 2 people going somewhere by car, you can choose a small car. You don't need capacity for 5 or 6 people. If you are going to the DIY store or moving house or something, you can rent a van. And instead of driving 5 or 6 times with a small compact car to make a move or to take care of a task, you only need to go once because your vehicle has that capacity. Car share vehicles also have better emission standards. That means car share vehicles are used more frequently, so there's a higher turnover for the car share vehicles. That also means the fleet is renewed much more often. And all of that combined together, and this is the greatest impact and why the city of Bremen focuses so much on car sharing as part of our sustainable transport policy, is that it reduces car ownership. In Bremen, we have a car replacement quota of, for example, one car sharing car replaces 16 privately owned cars. That means, I mentioned this issue of space and equitable use of public space. This helps us address that issue quite significantly. Right, but what else does sustainable mobility need? Not just the modes of transport and the tools, but sustainable mobility also needs attractive forms of living for citizens of all needs. We need attractive public spaces, as I already mentioned, especially those public spaces that involve the transitioning between different modes of transport. We also need more respect for people, not cars. I find that transport planning is so much about semantics, and we talk about traffic and vehicles synonymously, and we need to get away from that. We need to start thinking about people, moving people and goods, rather than moving vehicles. If we change that, we can change the efficiency of our transport system entirely. We also need the willingness and the political will and the strength of character as planners to endure conflicts. Change is always difficult for society, and if we back down from good planning measures because of conflicts, we will not make any progress. And we also need actual implementation rather than concepts, feasibility studies, toolkits, roundtables. Simply doing is so important. Right. But last and not least, we need interdisciplinary forward-thinking planners, like all of you today, participants today, looking forward and looking to plan more efficient transport systems. And efficiency doesn't mean necessarily digital. When I started working in the transport field, I started out in the area of ITS, working together within the ministries of the Scandinavian countries and the German Transport Ministry. And I found out, or I learned quite quickly, that so much about efficiency and actual efficiency is not about the technological side, but about the behavioral side of transport. And that's where my interest for the topic arose today, which is actually mobility management and housing developments. That's the title of the presentation. But why is mobility management and housing developments actually important? You might be asking. Because people are most likely to change their travel behavior when something major changes in their life. Is it a new job? They have kids move out, or simply moving into a new home. Those are key times when you can access or change mobility behavior. And our parking policies in Bremen for new housing developments play into that crucial moment in people's lives. So in most cities, it's the case when a new house, a new property is being developed, there is a requirement by the city to build a certain number of parking spaces. That's the case in Bremen as well. But since 2013, we have modified our policies for housing developments to say that if an investor cannot build those parking spaces, he can pay a fee to the city, or if he does not want to pay, or cannot pay, he can pay a fee to the city, or if he does not want to build parking spaces, he can invest in mobility management instead. Or, for instance, if it's not possible to provide the necessary number of parking spaces. And that mobility management can look like the inclusion of a car sharing station on the property, the provision of public transport memberships for residents, or car sharing memberships for residents. And that in combination can lead to an annulment of the fee. So instead of paying this fee to the city, they're able to pay or invest this fee into mobility management, and therefore also meet the needs of their residents moving into that property at the time. So the mobility management measures I mentioned, we've categorized. Those that have a highest impact on reducing car ownership are the ones that we placed priority on. So providing car sharing as an alternative to second, third, or even the first car in a household, and public transport tickets. But there are also other effective measures that, in combination with those, can also lead to an attractive alternative to car ownership and car use. And for example, that can be bike sharing, providing cargo bikes, cargo bike sharing, electric scooters, bicycle repair shops, railway cards. The opportunities are almost endless. But most important for us as a city is that a developer provides an offer that is specific to the needs for that target group. So an elderly care home has different mobility needs, and there are different mobility options that can be offered. And for a student home, or single family home developments, or office developments. So it's very important that together with the investors, we develop target group oriented mobility management concepts. And also important to us as well is that the offers are available for a minimum of 5 years. Mobility behavior doesn't change overnight, so there has to be a certain longevity. And we require the developers to offer concepts that are in place for at least 5 years. And I'd like to share one quick example with you, and it's a very nice one, a recent one from our local social housing developer, who with two new building blocks they developed, replaced 21 car parking spaces with a car sharing or with a mobility hub that featured 2 car sharing parking bays, bike sharing, and a cargo bike, and free memberships to those of the residents of those properties. The added benefit, obviously, is that these services are not in the back lot, they're not in the lowest level of the parking garage, but visible and easily accessible for everybody in a safe, well-lit space. And it's also something that not only the residents of these houses or developments can use, but it becomes available to the entire neighborhood. That's a very, very nice example. But as a city, obviously, when we invest in policies, we have to ask the question, does it have an impact? Is it effective? Does it reduce car ownership? Does it lower the demand for parking spaces? Does it lead to more sustainable travel behavior? Obviously, common sense says yes. But as a city, we have to analyze this, or use opportunities to analyze this. And we did this just this past year. The English report will be coming out next month. So if you're interested in receiving the English report, please email me. I'll share the contact details after my presentation. But we reviewed the impact of all of the projects that had been running and completed over the last 7 years. And surprise, surprise, or rather not a surprise, the users of these mobility management concepts versus the control group owned significantly fewer cars than the non-users. The proportion of households with only 1 car was also lower among the users of the concept. So we can say very clearly it has a positive impact on reducing car ownership. And the same thing goes for car use. When we looked at the modal split of the users of the mobility concepts versus the control group in the surrounding neighborhoods, we also saw that the users used public transport and walked and cycled significantly more than the control group, and they also used cars less. So we got exactly the result we wanted. Some skeptical investors, we say, we can't sell our properties without providing parking spaces. This is not what our clients or our buyers want. And the contrary is true. We asked how the residents evaluated being offered mobility alternatives to parking spaces. So if an investor reduced a parking space, and that was also significantly really well received. The majority said it was a good or a very good idea. So reducing parking spaces and at the same time providing attractive mobility alternatives to the private car ownership is really positively evaluated by the users. So just to wrap up or sum up, the mobility management concepts work. We saw that they led to a significant reduction in car use and car ownership. The transport tickets were particularly popular, but also these communication aspects were extremely important. They are essential for the success of any mobility management concept. During the study, we also talked with investors, and the result is quite clear. Every investor, every project needs guidance. So for the investors, that process and their options have to be quite clearly communicated. They also need, qualified advice from the side of the city. Investors are not necessarily mobility experts. That's why it's essential that the city offers a guiding hand. And we also found, however, that the investors are highly motivated to provide mobility alternatives rather than parking spaces to their residents, because they recognize the many benefits. When one is offering or being able to meet the mobility needs of their residents, it's also leverage that we have as a city to get investors, private investors, thinking about the mobility needs of the people they're building for. Investors also can see that they can increase the attractiveness of their properties by offering or advertising with these mobility concepts. They are able to increase the value of property. Many people now look at what mobility options are around before choosing where they're going to live. Options like this and collaborative opportunities like this also help reduce the financial risk for mobility providers to go into new neighborhoods or new districts. And it is also possible to lower building costs by reducing the number, or being able to reduce the number of parking spaces provided in new housing developments. That automatically transfers to lower building costs, and lower building cost means more affordable housing. So this has very little to do with essentially the ITS aspect, the digitalization aspect. But for me, this is all still part of smart mobility, intelligent mobility, because they are clever and well-devised and efficient means of influencing travel behavior, car ownership, and car use. And I think there we have that common ground, which is also what ITS is trying to achieve. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you for your attention. If you have any questions about our policies or how they can transfer to your local or regional concept or context, please don't hesitate to contact me. I can also hang out in the chat afterward for a conversation. Or maybe there's some questions now. So thanks very much.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you very much.